Welcome to the Acrylic Portrait Painting Challenge Masterclass, lesson number 2, sketching your portrait for a firm foundation. I hope you're doing well, and I'm excited to teach you the next step in this process of creating a beautiful portrait, and that is creating a solid sketch. Now, just like a house builder wouldn't go about building a house unless they had a nice concrete level foundation to start attaching studs and the framework to, you don't want to go into creating a portrait haphazardly. You want to have a plan, and you want to have a solid sketch, which is basically your beginning point of putting on the paint. So I'm going to teach you how to do that. But I just want to say I'm excited because we've had several people sign up for this challenge, and I'm already seeing in our Facebook group beautiful grids. Yeah, I know grids aren't that exciting, but they're part of the process. And this is where we left off here. And I'm seeing students replicate this grid just, well, about as perfectly as can be replicated. I'm so proud of them. And I'm proud of you for your interest in this challenge and for deciding to step out in faith and believe that you can paint a portrait even if you've never done it before. So that being said, if you haven't already done so, I'd encourage you to sign up for the Portrait Painting Challenge. You can do that in the link below this video. It should be in the comments and in the description as well. You can sign up at realisticacrylic.com/portrait-painting-challenge. Now, when you sign up, I'll send you the welcome kit, and that includes everything you'll need to paint along with us. You will get the reference photo with and without the grid. You get the supplies list, which includes all the different things, the paintbrushes, the colored pencil, what kind of canvas to use, so you'll know exactly what to shop for. You'll get the palette layout guide, which shows you how to arrange your paints in such a way that you can mix confidently and not end up with a muddy mess. And you'll get the masterclass lesson schedule, so you know what lessons are going to be uploaded and when. And also I'll be sending you each of these lessons too, so you don't have to worry about when am I going to see it. It'll pop up right in your email inbox. So go ahead and sign up for the challenge. Again, realisticacrylic.com, and the address is right there in the link. Be glad to have you as a part of this. Okay, so I would like to encourage you, if you are taking the challenge currently, if you did this last step here of gridding your canvas, go ahead and please post your progress in our Facebook group. So that will encourage other people that they can do this as well, that it's not too difficult. And then what I'd like you to do too is leave a comment below in this video right now and let me know, what is your number one goal in portrait painting? What would you just love to do if you could do? Is it to paint a portrait of maybe your grandchildren or family members? Is it to be able to paint a portrait that you can hang on your own wall, or do commission paintings for others, get income coming in as an artist? Or is it to be able to enter your work into art shows and exhibitions, maybe win some awards, make some sales that way? Let me know what your number one goal is. I would love to hear that. Leave it in the comments right now, and then I'll get back to you on that. I'll reply to your comments. I'd love to hear it. Okay, before we go any further, let's open up with a word of prayer. I just want to ask God for His help, because apart from Him, I can do nothing. And when we invite Him into the process, then we know we have the ultimate source of creativity, God Himself, who created everything we see, with us in the process. So let's do that. Father, I come before you in Jesus' name, and I just, again, thank you for this opportunity to be able to teach artists to paint a portrait they can be proud of, to use their gifts to beautify the world around them. You've made that possible with this technology here that we have on YouTube and all the different ways of getting this out. And Lord, I pray you would bless the artists watching this video. Let them know that they can do this. It is possible to paint a portrait because you've given them the desire. That's why they're here. And if you've given them the desire, you've made a way for that to be possible, in part with my teaching. And I pray you'd help me to be able to teach this clearly and just give them a sense of confidence that they can do this. bless them with good health, and I pray that you provide everything they need in this process. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so let's dive in here. Our first step to be able to get this sketch up here, we're going to break it down into 3 steps. And the first step of that process is to create a rough outline. We want to create a loose outline of the form. So let's go ahead and do that. You should already have the supplies that you need. You're only going to need a couple supplies today: your colored pencil and your eraser. Okay, so I'm using a terracotta colored pencil. This is a Prismacolor. You could also use a burnt ochre or even a dark brown. And then you want to have an eraser. You don't necessarily even have to have a large eraser like this. I just use a cap eraser like you can see here. And that cap eraser is plenty good, and it has a nice tip on it, so you'll be able to get some pretty precision erasing. If you want to really go crazy into it, you can get one of these battery operated erasers here, and they're going to go even further into the process. Now you should have your canvas sealed in, so that's super important. Where we left off last time was we had the grid put up, and then we went over on top of that with a layer of matte medium and gesso. If you haven't sealed in your grid, make sure you do that first. Let it dry for an hour or 2 before you begin this process, okay? That's super important, not only to provide as a barrier between your grid, so you don't erase that as you're erasing certain areas of your sketch that you have to redo, and that's just part of the process too. But also so that it's so much easier to erase, because that gesso and matte medium is a super flat finish, and that's going to allow that eraser just to work like a dream to erase anything that might need adjustment. So we use colored pencil. We don't use graphite pencil here. I mean, you can if that's all you've got, but the way I teach it is using colored pencil, and it just works fantastic with this process here, putting down the matte medium gesso layer, and then the colored pencil just goes over so nicely. It already has a nice flesh tone tint to it, so it's going to work better with your paint, and it erases so well, and you'll see that here as long as you follow the instructions and use matte medium, not like gloss medium or anything like that. Okay, we're gonna actually dive into the process here. I just want to make sure I was covering some of those fundamentals. Step number 1, let's finally get to that. Step number 1, putting in that loose outline. So we've got our reference photo up here on the Kindle, and that's important to have that set up right next to your canvas so that you can really see what's going on and you don't lose a lot of information as you're scanning way over here, like 3 feet away. You lose some of that in your brain. You want to have that reference photo right up next to your canvas. So whether you print it out or you have a Kindle or you have a iPad, just make sure it's really close to your canvas. You can mount that up, by the way, with a reference photo holder, and you can get that at realisticacrylic.com in the painting classes section for free. I'll show you how to do that. I'll put a link in here too in the comments or description so you can get it there. Okay, let's go ahead and put in that loose outline. So we have everything laid out. We want to begin it basically from the top down. We're going to work from kind of top down, left to right. We're going to look for a good launching point to get into this. I usually like to start with the shoulder or the head, but we're just going to get in a loose outline. You're going to pay attention to where these lines occur. Let's actually start all the way down at the bottom in this case. That seems to be like a good launching point. So we'll go ahead and just count the squares over. So bottom square counting over to the right, and then observe where the line falls within that area. Kind of think of fractions like a half, 2/3, 1/4. And I would say this falls at maybe a little less than a half, but a little more than 1/3. So I guess that'd be like 2/5, but we're just going to start doing short, choppy sketch marks. That's what we want to do, short, choppy sketch marks. And we start out lightly, and then we'll get darker as we go along. But first, we just want to make sure we can, get this form in here pretty well. All right, so short, choppy strokes. You also want to keep your pencil nice and sharp, so you should have your pencil sharpener handy. I forgot to mention that as far as supplies you need, but it is in our welcome kit in the supplies list. So have a good mechanical sharpener or a nice sharpener, a manual one that works just as well. All right, so again, just kind of loosely sketching in the form here. Let's just move that camera over a little bit. There we are. I just want to be able to see the process. All right, so we're getting in the outer contour of her arm, shoulder, then going into the neck area. Okay, we'll get in a little bit of the outline of the hair. Now that seems maybe tricky because the hair's got so many waves. I don't want you to look at putting in all the detail of the hair forms right now. I want you to keep it simple and just get in kind of the outside contour. Just imagine if this woman here was basically a silhouette. You remember like in grade school where they had you, turn to the side profile, they shined a light on your face and then somebody drew in a shadow of your face and then you would cut it out, with colored paper, and then that's you'd have this like silhouette portrait of yourself. Just imagine that we're doing that here. We're just kind of getting a simple sense of the outline mostly and going from there. So I just want to keep it really, really simple. And again, we're going very, very light to begin with. All right, now with this it's pretty easy because we're following this format. We can make sure we've got the right amount of squares. So her shoulder should be up at this point here, which would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and on that 7th square and then over to the right, that's kind of the apex of her shoulder where we've got these two angles converging. So just to double check yourself that you are making her tall enough, make sure you count up your squares and that you're putting these areas in the right place. So we've got the top of her shoulder, like the trapezius area, and then the neck, and they converge right here at this inset grid. All right, so now we're going to continue on with this form, kind of doing the outside contour, putting in the hair. Okay, and then we have this shoulder here. And this terracotta pencil works pretty well for this. It's going to get us a nice warm tone for her flesh tones in her face. But again, you could use dark brown or sepia or anything like that too. Chocolate is another color that seems to work well. Okay, I got to make sure I've got this in the right place. Let's just erase that. See how easily that erases? Erases so easily with this treatment we did with the matte, medium, and gesso. Okay, this shoulder needs to be coming out a little further, and we want this line to converge right here at maybe about a little more, well, about 2/3 at this point, and then we go down to, it just kind of touches that point there. Now it's going to exceed this mark here. Okay, and here's the bottom part of her arm. Let's switch cameras here just so you can see that. There's the bottom part of the arm. And then we're going to bring that palette around. inside part. This would be her hip area, and that's going to come out maybe about to that halfway point. All right, I just got to make sure I got this right. See, sometimes it's easy to get lost, but that erases really easily here. I noticed that, let's see, this contour actually, yeah, this actually comes up a little higher here, bottom of the elbow, and then here's the palate, the edge of the palate, and then here's her hip right here. So I had that wrong. There it is. All right. Okay, so here we have the contours. You're just going to want to kind of look at this and see that you did it similar to what I have. I'm just going to move the camera up kind of close in so you can see it. We have note where everything is placed, and then note kind of the positions here of everything and where it's all at and where it ends up. So that'll be important just to get that outer contour. This is all we have right now. And then we're going to call this kind of a sub-step of step one. We're going to put in a little bit more than just this outline. We're going to actually start kind of getting in the division between her hair where it ends and her face lies, and then the opening of her shirt. We're also going to now get in the shape of the palette, and then loosely block in where her hands are at. So this is all going to be still kind of part of step one yet. All right, let's go ahead and do that. Let's just simply kind of decide where the edge of her hair is and the face. And again, I want you to use really short, choppy sketch marks. I don't want you to like do a precision kind of line like you're using a pen or anything. The short, choppy kind of strokes allow you to adjust direction really quickly, and going kind of loose with your sketch. Just had to sharpen the pencil. Going loose with your sketch at first is really makes it a lot easier to adjust direction and to dial it in later. Okay, so here we're looking at this inset. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. We're doing the inset here, and just going to pivot this a little bit so it's straight for you. Just blocking in where the hair is at, and we're looking at about a halfway point here for the edge of the jawline. All right, so you can move it over just a little bit so you can see the reference photo as we're working on this here. So you can see just a little bit of that edge of the jawline here, and that's what we're trying to portray. All right, so now we are going to get that lower edge of the jaw. It's going to cut in right here. And then we're going to show the chin. So we've got just a simple form of her chin. And that kind of curves around like this. So here's the edge of the outside of the face. Have the neck somewhere right in here. This kind of cuts in. And you don't have to get this perfect. When we're working on the sketch here, it's important to realize the sketch is just here to serve you as a foundation for your painting. It does not have to look like a whole finished drawing with all the shading and all the detail. It just has to be good enough to serve as a foundation for you to be able to put those first layers of paint on. Okay, and we're going to now kind of block in the opening of her shirt, and then this line goes, the opening goes just along this line here. 1, 2, 3, 4 down, so that fourth line down from the top. That opening is just going to kind of rest upon that for a bit. Then it's going to curve up here and kind of gets at about the halfway point there. And we do have some hair kind of flowing down, but again, you don't have to worry about blocking it in too much. If you want to suggest it in, just do it with some quick kind of angular shapes. So you want to almost make it more abstract, and and not think of it as hair, but just think of it as a shape that you're creating. And doing this will serve you very well in the painting process too. So I'm just basically seeing, I can show you in this reference photo, this angle here of her hair there, and that angle there. It's almost a rectangular shape that's kind of tilted just a little bit to the side. And that's what we're trying to recreate right now at the beginning, just to keep it simple. Okay, so now we're going to want to go ahead and block in the form of that palette that's a very dominant shape, so that's very important. So let's do that. We have to kind of get a launching point for it to figure out where it's at. And once we do that, it makes it so much easier then to kind of fill it in. So we can use actually the woman's arm as a reference point rather than only looking at just the rather than just looking only at the grid itself. But let's start with this lower contour, and that's just a little off camera, lower contour right here, and that would be 1, 2, 3. So we're counting from the bottom here, 1, 2, 3, and it's going to start right there. Let's just kind of start right there, and the line is going to hit at about a little above the halfway point between the intersection of these grid lines. And then we're going to bring up that curve. Notice the technique here of how we hold the pencil. Notice when I'm sketching, I'm not holding it like this as if I'm writing, but I'm holding it more towards the end of the pencil. That allows me a good freedom of movement, and that again is very, very important in this process. Technique really helps us to do it properly. So hold your pencil more at the end by the eraser part rather than by the tip. Okay, so continuing on in this process here, we got our little bit of a launching point, and we're going to curve this up and around. And then we have kind of the area of her fingers, which I just want to really loosely block in, just seeing the shape. I'm not that concerned about getting it perfect. I do want to make sure I've got it roughly occupying the right space. But that's just a reference point so I can continue the palette. Now the palette has this kind of hook part on the end, and it's going to curve up like this. It's going to be hitting the this part of the grid at maybe 3/4 of the way over. 1, 2, 3, 4. So 3/4 of the way over. And then notice where it's hitting that inset. It's right below the inset. And then up here, you want to see these little shapes. And if I can just zoom right in really close so you can see what I'm talking about. You want to see, looking at your reference photo, all right, this shape right here. So just notice that the shape that's being created by the intersection of the grid and then the contour of this palette. All right, so that particular shape that's being created is kind of a negative space, so to speak, or it's a non-dominant shape, but it's almost a little triangle. And when you can see those shapes, what they look like, then you'll notice that you have to replicate that same thing onto your canvas. Look for those kind of shapes being created all over wherever the contour of the form you're sketching intersects with your grid line. And that's going to help you out a lot in being able to faithfully reproduce what you're seeing in your reference photo onto your canvas. Okay, so let's continue on here, and we'll just move that camera back over a little bit, and we're going to just continue on and keeping that same kind of curve. Again, these forms here, we want to keep them pretty free flowing. All right, and we're going to get this palette shape to go down. So you don't have to have a compass to create a round form. You just have to do a series of short little choppy strokes here to sketch in. Now we're at that point where we can start sketching in her hand. Let's just zoom it out a little bit so you can see the rest of that. All right, so her hand can be blocked in right here. And again, we just want to keep a very, very simple form. Where does this reside? Okay, it stops a bit short of this last grid line. Again, I want to keep it simple at this point. Okay, so last thing I'm going to do for this step would be just to create the contours, the division between her chest and her arms. So we have to show the wrinkles in her clothing to do that. So let's go ahead and put that in. Again, we're going to look at that reference photo where those things occur, and we're just going to kind of reproduce what we're seeing here. So let's do that. We've got kind of the division between her upper arm and her forearm. So there's a little crease there. We want to get that put in. That's what we're seeing right there. And then we've got, you know, her chest right here, and we've got a series of a few different wrinkles. We put these wrinkles in like that and just keep it pretty simple. Now let's move over to the other side, and we've got a wrinkle right here. Just kind of like that angle, and that's about it. That's about it. I realized that I forgot to get the bottom edge of that palette in. So I was getting kind of excited about the other parts. Let's go ahead and get that portion in. Just that bottom edge of the palette. So we're just going to continue to sketch that form in. Notice the shapes that are being created by these grid lines where they intersect, and where the palette intersects, and kind of recreate that same shape. All right, so something like that. And then we could probably put in, I guess, that little opening, the thumb hole, which would be something about like this. And don't put it right in the middle of the square. It's actually above the middle. So just make sure that you're seeing what's actually there and reproducing that, because our tendency is to order everything in our world. So, you know, just like you organize maybe the canned food and soups in your cupboard and put them all in a row and categorize them, we tend to bring that into our artwork. So, you know, you'll want to paint, you know, the iris and pupil directly in the middle of the eye, even though it often is not. And you'll want to put this circle, trust me, you'll want to put this little circle here right in the middle of this square, but don't do that. It's actually a little bit to the left and above the midpoint. So put it where it's actually at, and then it's going to be more realistic. Okay, so this is where we're at in the process. We've completed step number 1 of the sketching process. High fives, congratulations, you did great. Now we're going to go on to step number 2. And step number 2 is where we're going to fill in the facial features and detail. All right, so we've got a nice solid representation here of the form. We've got, you know, the outlines in, and now it's going to make it so much easier to put in the rest of it. Let's sharpen our pencils quick. Okay, and let's go ahead and lock in these forms. So We're going to start again very, very simply, same thing that we did in the first step, and then we'll make it more complex as we go on. I'm going to dial in that camera to the top here. Just make sure we've got that. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin just by really looking at the reference photo, and I'm going to see if we can get that in the camera shot here so you can see that too. We'll zoom in a little bit on her face as well. And then what we're going to do is we're going to kind of figure out where her eyes are at, first of all. Fortunately, we have the grid to help us. We can see that the eyes kind of reside. Well, the first eye is going to be not in the middle of this grid, but a little bit to the right. So we're going to start just kind of sketching that out. And that's the best way to learn, is to just do it. Just do it, and even if it's not perfect, you get better as you go on. I've had to find that out too, not only with doing artwork, but like with marketing classes and different things. It's not my natural skill set, and I've just had to learn just by doing, you know. So that's the best way to do it. So now we have the eye shape, and we want to make sure that we don't create a football eye shape. That's what we typically associate eyes as looking like, or you know, just like footballs. But I really want you to kind of notice the exact shape of her eye, though at this point it's still kind of rough. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I want you to really be looking at what makes her eye unique, and notice kind of, you know, how it tapers in. We've got that tear duct in there, and it's usually the lid is flatter on the bottom and rounder on the top. You also want to block in the eyebrow and roughly, you know, where that eyebrow resides within the image too. So that is also important. Okay, so we're gonna put in the eye on the right, and the eye on the right basically just about fills in the whole width of this inset square, this 1-inch square. Again, we got the 2-inch squares on the outside and the 1-inch squares on the inside. And then another thing to notice is that, let's see, yeah, this one eye on the left is just a little bit lower, just a little bit lower than the eye on the right. And so let's pay attention to that detail too. We'll just kind of lower that a slight bit and put this one up just a little bit higher. And again, I gotta keep it really simple, so let me just follow my own instructions here and keep it simple. This is kind of blocking the eyebrow up there, paying attention to that angle, and then we'll go ahead and block in a line for the nose. What's most important really is getting that bottom point of the nose and getting that position correct. So really observe on the square where that occurs, asking yourself, like based on fractions, is it 1/3, 2/3, is it a quarter, is it a half? I'm seeing it's maybe about a quarter of the way down. So that's where I'm going to plot it out here. And then we got the wing of the nose on one side, wing of the nose on the other side, and they actually are going to go past the grid line. So you want to make sure that you get them, you get the nose wide enough, because there might be a temptation to make it narrower than what it is. So you get that whole width of the nose in. Don't worry so much about the nostrils right now. And again, just try to really sketch what you're seeing. Now let's go ahead and plot out the mouth, which, where's the mouth occur within this square? We have a lot of stuff happening within that one square. So we'll really want to look at that. We've got the nose here, we've got a gap, and that mouth occurs, I would say, a little below the halfway point. It's not half, but a little below the half. And getting that gap between the nose and the mouth is very important for the likeness. So we're going to pay attention to that exact shape of the mouth as much as we can. And mouths are tricky, notoriously tricky. But by sketching it out here, you're going to find it much, much easier than just diving in with paint. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and raise up this right side. Her mouth is not symmetrical, so you just want to notice that it is a little bit askew on this right hand side. It does kind of turn up just a little bit, and that is part of capturing her likeness, her specific likeness. And the lip is very thin. You want to pay attention to how thick or how thin the lip is. The upper lip does have a certain amount of thickness. Now at this point here, I'm not going to ask you to draw on the teeth. Just keep it very simple. Let's not worry about the teeth yet. Let's just get in the basic forms and we'll make it more complex later. Okay, so this really, I would say, almost good enough, but let's just add that nasolabial fold, that laugh line. That's important. And that really shows off her smile. There is an accessory fold here. We would call that the accessory jugal fold, which shows part of her smile. It's kind of a dimple. And then we've got her chin separation. I'm not going to even put in the pupils and irises yet. At this stage here, again, I want to keep it really simple. But let's add a little bit more complexity to her hair while we're up here. So we're going to kind of have to erase it just a little bit. But it's kind of a combination of erasing and then adding on. So if you kept everything pretty light, that'll be easy. Let's go ahead and just add a little bit of the detail of the hair. I don't want to make it too complex. I want to show in some of the forms here, just the fact that it's kind of wavy, kind of curly. We've got a little bit of a lockdown here. We want to portray that. So let's put in that little bit of a lock. We got a couple of strands in here that we can kind of isolate. Again, keeping it simple. We want to kind of dial in the outside contour of her cheek and her jawline. So there's a little bit of a divot in here we want to get in there. She does have a strand of hair that's kind of flowing down. We want to dial in this form. I'm just going to erase. There's a little bit of a form that comes down here. We're going to want to dial that in too. All right, and now we're going to go ahead and get a little bit of the curvature on the top here. Just a little bit of the curvature of her hair here on the top. There is a divot there and a little bit of a divot here. Now on the outside edge, you're getting a little more of the complexity of the shape. Okay. And then let's get that little gap between her neck and her hair, because there's kind of an opening where we can see the background behind it, and then we can see the back of her shoulder as well and where that falls. And that's a nice negative space that we really want to pay attention to. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit right there so you can see it. But that little bit of a negative space, very, very important. And that occurs right here. So you can look at your reference photo. It's almost a triangular shape that you're looking for. But let's go ahead and kind of block that in, and it's going to reside. Oh yeah, that little angle resides above the grid line, and then this opening goes up higher. So I really have to, you want to look at that reference photo way more often than what you're used to. Probably 50% of the time, just really be looking back and forth, you know, to see how I'm doing here. I'm looking at my reference photo, looking at the sketch, back and forth, just to really make sure I'm observing and not just sketching what I think I see, but what I actually see. Okay, so now we'll bring in a little bit of the contours of the hair and give it some more complexity so it's not just that angled form. We'll put in a little bit of the curvature of it as well. And I think you can maybe just see that I was slightly off camera. Just put in this little bit of a divot right there. And now we can go ahead and do some work on the rest of it. Kind of continue this process along down to her hands and the palette and just kind of tighten things up a little bit. We're still in step number 2. So let's go ahead and do that. We didn't add in the paint brushes yet, so that's a consideration. We'll do that now as we also add in some detail and form for her fingers. So let's do that. Let's kind of tighten up these fingers a little bit, really plot out exactly where they're at. We're going to look at the contours of the grid and everything, and this is kind of where we're at right now. There's a separation between that first joint of the finger, and it's going to flow down like this. Now the finger straightens out at this point, but it does appear to go below this grid line here. So it actually gets intersected a little bit at that point. Now we've got the knuckle just hitting this outside line, this grid line here. And I have to erase my mark here for the palette because that was off a little bit, and that's fine. See, I just want you to start off very loose and then just kind of erase when you need to. It works a lot better that way. Just to put down some very rough, crude marks at first and then refine them later. Now we've got her finger intersecting, that fingernail intersects this grid line. And again, so you can see what's going on in the reference photo. This is what we're trying to portray right here. You can see how that's all working out. Okay, so we're going to continue on. Now let's get in those paint brushes simply. And now remember, they're kind of coming forward in space. So it's as if, when I mean forward, you know, it's not like I'm holding this colored pencil here straight up. They're actually coming out toward the viewer a little bit. So it shortens, and we call that foreshortening when an object is not seen in its true length. But when it's tilted towards us, it actually then appears to be shorter. And we want to capture that element that happens in the world around us onto the canvas. And that gives us a wonderful sense, a wonderful illusion of depth and reality. It makes our portraits so much more realistic. So we're going to get that kind of angle in here, get these brushes tilted toward the viewer. Where does the tip of the brush occur? Well, it goes past this palette, so it's going to intersect that line of the palette, and it's going to almost hit the top of this horizontal grid line here. So that's where we're going to put it. And then we have another one that's kind of, I guess, to the right of that grid line, and that's just going past this next horizontal grid line here. Well, no, it's the same one, but this one falls short of it just ever so slightly. This one's going past it, and it looks like a nice flat angled brush, but it's at an angle. It's tilted somewhat away from us. So it would be as if, let me see, I'm holding this brush here. See what it looks like when I hold it straight on. But if I were to take it like this and tilt it toward you a little bit, notice how all of a sudden it looks skinnier, and then you have two angles there. That's who you're trying to portray. So we're not trying to portray it like this, we're trying to portray it like that. All right, so that's what's going on. And we have a couple other brushes. There they are. Okay. Yeah, so I think that'll work for now, just to get it in kind of simply. the bottom of that sleeve in there. Okay, let's go ahead now and go to the other hand on the other side. We'll continue that process over there. So we've got the 3 different fingers that are seen. Now we can't see the 4th finger. In fact, we can only see the 2 fingers on this side because the other fingers are underneath the palette, right? They're behind the palette. So here we only see 3 fingers, but let's just paint what we see. We know that she has 4 fingers. It's just that the 4th one is tucked behind the edge of the palette. And I think that's pretty evident. So we're going to now, whereas before we had that outer contour of the hands, now we're going to be separating all the fingers and showing the different lines for them. Okay, I really want to, kind of observe where the finger falls within the grid line. It looks like this grid line just bisects the ring finger that we can see, the bottom finger that's showing. It intersects it, and that's going to help us a lot in making that look right. All right, so we have a little bit space here, and then we want to make sure also that that other finger is a little smaller. That ring finger is a little smaller than the middle finger. Okay, so let's do a couple of the wrinkles of her clothing on the bottom. I just need to quickly sharpen my pencil. And let's go ahead, on the bottom here, we'll just dial in some of these wrinkles. And you can see that on the pleating of her dress right there. You've got these different angles. Let's put those in. We've got one wrinkle right here. And I think that's just a little off camera, so let me just zoom this out a bit. One wrinkle right here. We've got another wrinkle there. We've got another one here. Again, don't put them right in the middle of the squares. That's what you'll be tempted to do, but rather really pay attention to where they occur. And this wrinkle is like closer to this grid line. And then we have this wrinkle here, and that's closer to this one. So we skip a grid line, and then we have that other wrinkle there. And we've got this wrinkle occurring maybe about 1/3 of the way from the edge of this grid line here. All right, so that gives us a nice idea of what's going on. So this then is the end of step number 2. Now, in step number 3, what we want to do is refine the sketch and then actually block in some shading, block in kind of the value structure very simply so that when we begin the painting, we know where to put those glazes, because blocking in the value structure is so important in creating a realistic portrait. But this is step number 3. All right, so if you got this far and you've got these forms locked in here looking kind of like this, give yourself a pat on the back, because it's not easy and you did it. So I'm very proud of you. We're going to continue on. We're going to add some more detail in, really refine any areas that might be off and try to tighten it up and just make it as accurate as we can. Doesn't have to be perfect. Just make it as good as you can. Okay, so we'll go back up to the face here and really tighten up the features, making sure we've got her exact likeness being portrayed as closely as we can. So let's do that. All right, so here we are, and we'll want to just kind of dial in her eyes. Now we're going to put in the pupils, the iris, that structure, and you don't want to put it right in the middle. Like I said before, she, just based on the way she's looking, the pupil and iris are just ever so slightly to the right. So we're just going to put this a little bit to the right side here, and notice where they are on your reference photo. Now that bottom of the eye, instead of again creating that shape, and I'll just grab something quick off camera, not going anywhere, but again, many people want to portray an eye like this, if you can see what I'm creating. Now I'm kind of simplifying it, and I know most of the artists watching this, you know, are way more refined than this. They can create a much more realistic eye than this. So I'm just kind of exaggerating for effect here, you know, what I've seen some artists do. And not judging anybody, we all have to start somewhere, right? But I just want to kind of get this point home to you that you don't want to create the eye looking like this, like a football with the, you know, pupil and iris right in the middle and eyelashes kind of all radiating around it. We really want to look at that distinct shape, and most of the time, you know, eyes kind of have a little bit of a taper to them, and they're going to be a little flatter on the bottom, and they'll curve up here. They'll be the tear duct, but they'll be kind of a curve at the bottom, and especially when they're smiling, the eyes get a little bit thinner, and then sometimes, you know, the pupil and the iris will not be right in the middle, depending on where they're looking, where their head is positioned, the eyelid above it, you know. So you want to really look at those distinctive features, and everybody's different. Everybody has a slightly different eye shape, but we want to, you know, really capture what it is we're seeing. So just want to show you that quickly. I got to sharpen my pencil again. Okay, we'll continue on. So we've got this little bit of a curve here, again showing that smile. We've got the pupil, iris getting in that shape, just the outside edge. We don't even have to get the pupil in yet, but we will. And then we have the upper eyelid crease. Now you might need to flip quickly to the reference photo without the grid to really see that shape, to really see you know, the distinct area, how the eyelid sits above the eye, because that grid line kind of is running right across it, and it's kind of hard to see it with that on there. So you can shift back to your reference photo without the grid to be able to get that detail in, and then shift back to the reference photo with the grid to lock in your proportions more. So just want to give you that tip. So I'm looking at the reference photo without the grid, just so I can dial in what her eyelid looks like. And here the eyelid has a little more width on this left hand side, and I'm going to really go close in here so you can see this. I know I'm going to lose the reference photo for a second, but I want to show you what I'm doing. If you study your reference photo, you'll notice that there's more of a gap between the upper part of the eyelid crease and the lower edge, and then it tightens up here as we go in. All right, so getting that particular shape is very, very important. Not having the same width all the way around, where between the eyelid crease on the top and the bottom edge of the eyelid below. Now on this right eye, the right eye is actually a little bit different than the left. It's got a little bit more of an overhang, a little blockier, and that you'll find with people that their eyes are not exactly the same. Sometimes, you know, their eye is a little bit more open than the other. It's just how we are. You know, we're all unique. So you really want to pay attention to those specific details that make a person unique. And that's one of Diane's features here that we're trying to capture. Okay, so we got that kind of dialed in. Now at this point, why don't we go ahead and put in that pupil and then just kind of roughly suggest where, you know, we're going to have the reflection on her eye. We don't have to do it perfectly. And again, you want to place that reflection in the right part, the correct part of the eye. Because of the lighting, that little hot spot, that highlight of the light on her eye is actually more towards the left of her eye. All right, so it's it's not right in the middle. So we want to make sure we have that in the right spot. In fact, I probably don't have it as close to the edge as I should, so I'm just going to shift that over a little bit by drawing the pupil over more. And you can actually kind of shade that in if you'd like, and you know, that gives you an idea of whether you've captured it correctly. All right, so I'll dial in her eyebrows just a little bit more at this stage. And this step number 3 is the step that's probably going to take the longest, because you really have to kind of refine what you did. We're going to kind of block in the nose, a little bit of the shading on the nose, try to get those distinct forms of the nasal bones here and where that all occurs. Now, I better go back to my grid just so I can make sure I'm plotting this out correctly. So I'm really going to look at where everything occurs here. Let's just zoom out a little bit. Yeah, so I can see, got to get a little more shading on the edge. And we can, with this process, we can begin to block in kind of the shading for, you know, the side of her head and where her hair is going to sit on there, and get that to be as close as we can. Get that true width of her face shown. Okay, and let's go ahead and block in a little bit of the shading here for the cheek. And the nose, that shape of the nose. Now we're going to dial in more of the form of her mouth. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit so you can see my reference photo. Let's move this down a little bit more. All right. So we want to dial in a little bit of the shape of her mouth. And this is where we can start putting in some of the form of the teeth. Now, the nasolabial fold on the left-hand side is going to be darker than the nasolabial fold on the right-hand side because it's in shadow, whereas the other side is more illuminated. So we want to make sure we don't over-darken this right side here. We'll put in some shading here for the lips and kind of dial in the teeth. Now, to begin the teeth, you want to get that crevice, that space between the edge of the mouth and where the teeth start, the visible part of the teeth as they curve around. And so that kind of occurs right along this edge of the grid line. I'm going to zoom in a little bit just so you can really see what I'm doing. And we're going to, instead of drawing in all the teeth, I'd like you to think of just drawing in the shape of the gums above them. And by dialing in that shape, it makes it so much easier. Let's begin with the 2 front teeth, and we'll work our way out from the edges. We'll kind of plot where that shape is, looking at the gum line, and then getting in some of these forms from there. And each teeth is a little bit different. So the 2 front teeth are going to be a bit larger, and the other teeth are going to be generally smaller. And then you have a gap between the canine tooth and the other tooth. I'll just zoom in even a little bit further so we can really hone in on that area. Okay, so we have this edge right here. We show the darkness of that crevice. All right, and now we've got kind of the way the teeth are sitting up against the edge. We can see a little bit of her bottom teeth, just ever so slightly. Just a little bit of, so her mouth, just like her eye is different on the right side, her mouth is also different on the right side. So the mouth tapers, it's skinnier. The lip is not completely straight across. There's more of an angle down here, more of an opening where we can see part of the bottom part of her teeth. Just make sure you put that in. We can only see that on the left side, not on the right. So we're going to dial that in like that and really pay attention to that top form of the lip and get that taper in there, that philtrum, which is very important. Okay, so now as I look at this, I think I need to just heighten her nose and get a little bit more of a gap in between her nose and her mouth. I'm just going to raise up that bottom edge of the nose ever so slightly. Just get a little more of a gap there. All right, and then there's a shadow that comes down below the nose. We'll get that in, and this little gap in between the wing of the nose and the nasolabial fold. We're going to put that in as well. Now we've got a shadow here along the chin. All right. And now let's get a shadow going below her chin and into the neckline. Let's go ahead and put that in. So we got this shadow here in the chin blocked in, and then here, now we're going to get a shadow going below the chin into the neck, and we're looking at creating an angle right here and here. It curves around the jugular vein. There's a little bit of shading here for that, and that lets us now fill this in, and that lets us know that when we paint this, that's all going to be getting a glaze. So we're just going to fill this in just like so, and that begins to give it some form and depth. All right, we have a little bit of shading here, and then this gets filled in. Now we don't want to make this too complex. Let's try to keep it just with enough detail so that we know what we're going to be doing when we paint. Get a little bit of a lighter area of the lock of her hair here being shown. Let's try to think of the hair as very, very simple forms that we're trying to create, not doing every little strand. See, she's got a little more hair on the top, and I want to create that. So let's go ahead and do that. This is an area where we have a distinction in value. Now, value is that difference between the lights and the darks, and we want to get that distinction blocked in at this point. And so really look at your reference photo and ask yourself, when you're looking at the hair or anything else, what's dark and what's light? What distinct shape does that dark area take? You know, and it's just like on a map where you have different areas. You know, you have the shape of the United States, you have the shape of my state I live in, for example, Wisconsin, and you know, they all have different shapes within the shapes. Try to see the shapes that these values create. So for example, when we're looking at the reference photo, I'm seeing this distinction here. I'm seeing this edge created by this darker area, and I treat that as a shape. It's a very dominant form, and once I can see it, then I can then create it on the canvas. So you have to take the form you're seeing and kind of simplify it, reduce the complexity of what you're seeing in this image with all these textures and forms and colors and skin tones, and then just create that on the canvas. Now, if it's helpful for you, one of the tricks some of my students have done to be able to see these forms more simply is to convert your reference photo to black and white. And you can do that with so many different photo apps now you can get on your tablet or on your computer. Just convert it to black and white, and it might be easier for you then to see the differences in tonal value and then to be able to create that on your canvas. So just a little tip for you if you find that helpful. Okay, we're going to, again, just block a few different values on her hair. few different things just to make it so that we know what's going to happen when we start painting. So inside here we've got kind of a complex form of a strand of hair where we can see the light shining through. And I don't want to make it too complicated, but I want to be able to give enough visual information here that we can see it. So say somewhere around there, and then there we've got some negative spaces in where the background kind of shines through, and we'll end up putting that in. All right, so let's take a look at the top of the head again. And we're going to just block in some of that shading at that point. Sharpen my pencil. All right, let's just kind of fill in this. It is complicated. I mean, there is a lot of different forms here. That's why we're breaking this down. It's very complex, but we just want to keep it simple. So I'm just going to have this mostly in shadow here and just try to see the major distinctions in tonal value. Here we have the hair kind of breaking up at this point, and whereas before we just did a simple outer contour, let's now kind of see where the hair starts kind of breaking away, where we see some of the background through it. The strands are starting to stop at this point. And I mean, we have some breakaway hair from the main mass of hair in this image. And then here, it's a little bit thicker. You see some of the curvilinear forms. The shoulder actually is kind of behind it and being illuminated. We're just going to create that sense of hair and frizziness here. That's why we call it a portrait challenge. So, you know, there's some elements that are a little harder to do, but if you can do this, if you can create this hair convincingly, you are going to be able to do that again and again and again in your portraits, because you'll have already done it successfully the first time. This is great practice, and this is good for beginners and more advanced artists alike. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at some of these other contours, but I like what we have so far. This is good. Let's just tighten up some of the wrinkles on her clothing, which this we did quite a bit of work on already. Okay, we have a couple wrinkles there. Tighten up the brushes a little bit. So here we're just going to kind of scroll along and just really tighten things up and try to refine the forms. Most of the work we spent on the face, that's the most important part. The rest of it, we don't have to do quite as bit now. So this is kind of coasting here to the finish line process of doing the sketch. We're getting really close. Thanks for hanging with me. Thank you for putting in the patience here of watching this and sketching it out. You're doing great. Keep up the good work. We're almost there. So now we're going to just kind of tighten up the palette a little bit, the fingers, just see if there's any areas that can be adjusted. Kind of put in some of those final details like the fingernails where they would occur. We're going to lock in some of the values like the shadow that the paint brushes are casting on her palette. So we want to make sure we get that in there. That's important. And we see that like going right across the palette. So maybe somewhere about here we have the shadow, and even though it's kind of indistinct, we'll sketch it where it's a little bit blurry and just plot it out first and then kind of fill it in. But just something about like that. And we just fill it in, just holding our colored pencil kind of towards the end and doing a loose blocking in of that value. We can fill in this oval here just so we know, yeah, that's got to get filled in. And then look at any major distinctions in value, like on the clothing, any wrinkles here. I'm going to plot out the value structure there. So again, I'm just trying to see where we have those distinctions between the lights and the darks. Even if it's a gradual shift, we just want to give it a more precise beginning and end point. And we put in the shading here. On the right hand side, we'll do the same thing. We'll just kind of get a little bit of shading between the edge of her chest and her arm. This whole area of the arm is going to be darker, so I'm just going to kind of block it in with my colored pencil on the side. Notice I'm holding it very close to the edge, and I'm really just kind of loosely filling in that form and telling myself, yep, this has to be painted dark right away. And this gives us again a sense of the form of what's going on. Three-dimensional look, blocking in those lights and darks, which is so important. Anything else? Let's see. We can do a little bit with her hair. And then I just want to scan her face quickly and see if there's anything I can tighten up. So let's just go back up there quick. And we'll just take a look and see, is there anything that needs to be done. The nice thing about this one here is the face is a lot smaller on it, so we don't have to put in quite as much detail. But it's large enough that it shouldn't be too difficult to paint, because sometimes when you paint a portrait where that face is only an inch tall, that's even harder than painting a large portrait. But this, I think, is a nice ratio here for a 16 by 20 canvas. So if you have any questions on this, by the way, be sure to drop them in the comments below the video. You might ask, well, what if I want to paint an 8 by 10 canvas, or 11 by 14, or 12 by 16? How do I do that? Drop it in the chat here in the comments below the video. I'll be happy to answer your question, or maybe some other artists will hop in. Or in our Facebook group, you can do that as well, Realistic Acrylic Portraits. If you have any questions, you can get a hold of me there too. But I'd love to hear from you in the comments below this video. We're getting close. Getting really close. So yeah, I'm just kind of darkening the lines a little bit more now that we have them dialed in, just so that it's somewhat darker than my grid lines. I want to just kind of tighten up the hair a little bit up here. Let's do that. We have a very dominant form here that I want to make sure I put that in. A nice curly cue of hair that kind of goes like this. I just want to get that in. So I'm going to erase a little bit and just tighten this up. We have another one right there, and that kind of flows in at a different angle. And they kind of intersect here. And then we have this main mass of hair that is in a slightly different place. Okay. Get this shadow here under her neck defined a little bit more. This shadow, kind of the edge of her neck right here, get that dialed in. Contour of her clothing. And then the width of the shoulder, make sure we get that in where it should be. Shoulders maybe just a little wider, a little bit wider. Okay. Fingernails down here, let's put them in. Maybe a shadow underneath. Just block in this shadow here under the palette. And that kind of falls in right about there. So I'm just going to darken that edge of the bottom of the palette and then put in that shadow. And we don't want that shadow to be precise. I mean, it needs to kind of follow the contour of the clothing. So just want to show that to you quick here with my closer up camera. So it's going to follow that pleating, and it's got kind of an organic shape. And that'll really create that illusion of depth when you get that divot in there. So there's just a slight little divot. And then the shadow kind of tapers up. And then here it's going to go down lower. So now that, see, the palette's closer to her body here. So that shadow is going to be smaller. But then when the palette gets farther from her body, as her body's curving around, you know, the curvature of the hips and so forth, then the shadow is going to naturally increase in width. And that really portrays a nice sense of realism when you pop that in. So let's just fill this in quickly here, because I know we're kind of getting low on time. I want to make sure we can finish this lesson within a reasonable amount of time. All right, so yeah, so something like that. So I think we're just about done here. Get this bottom edge of the palette just dialed in a little bit more. This is where we're at. Wow, sketching is a real process, isn't it? But if you have completed the sketch here, this is what you've got. I'm proud of you. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but if you ended up with a sketch that looks like her, looks like a person, has some shading in it, has a sense of the form of her facial features, the palette, her fingers, then again, I'm just so proud of you. I'm proud of you of what you've accomplished, and I hope you're proud of yourself, because creating a portrait is not easy. I mean, you know, you could do a landscape or a still life, and you know, if you have bits and pieces off, you know, who's really going to notice, right? I mean, you know, obviously it has to look, you know, realistic enough, but with portraits, it just has to, you know, look like the person so much more and have that accurate sense of form. So if you have done this, I am proud of you. And again, just look at what you created, be proud of it, thank God for it, celebrate, you know, go out to dinner, do whatever you need to do to celebrate. And this is how we're gonna continue this process. We're just gonna enjoy what we create. We're gonna look back and say, yeah, this is good. Now, if you need to make some changes, make some adjustments to it, feel free to do that. If you feel stuck, and that does happen as well, then go ahead and post your portrait in our Facebook group and ask for some help. Just say, I feel stuck right now. I'd like some advice. Or maybe you just want to know, hey, did I dial this in? Did I get a good sketch? Post it to the Facebook group. If you're really happy about what you did, like you're just amazed, this looks fantastic, post it to the Facebook group, Realistic Acrylic Portraits. Share this challenge with your friends, post it on your own Facebook page, let them know what you're doing, and I'd appreciate if you could put a link back to the Realistic Acrylic Portraits group so they can find us here and they can do a challenge as well, and you can get your friends painting this along with you. So again, I'm so proud of you, looking forward to teaching you the next step, which is going to be actually beginning the painting process. I'll be teaching you the glazing technique and how you can slowly transition from a good sketch into a beautiful painting, one brush stroke at a time, keeping it very light and not losing the likeness of your sketch. All right, so thank you so much. And again, looking forward to getting your comments below this video. Of course, like and subscribe to this channel, all those good things, and we'll keep in touch, all right? God bless you. Look forward to teaching you more, and we'll talk to you soon.